My mother-in-law poured something strange into my drink when she thought I wasn't looking. "A special cocktail for my favorite son-in-law," she said with a smile. I thanked her and discreetly swapped glasses with her husband, who had always criticized my career. 45 minutes later, dear listeners, welcome to another thrilling story from our channel. If you enjoy intense family dramas, intrigue, and surprising twists, be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and hit that like button. Now prepare to dive into the gripping plot of The Secret of the Miller Family. Happy listening. My name is Ryan Carter, 32 years old, a freelance photographer with a studio in Brooklyn, New York. I built my business from scratch: weddings, nature, magazine shoots, the kind of work that pays the bills if you're good, and I am. But to my in-laws, especially Eleanor, what I do was never enough. "How's that little photography hobby of yours?" Henry would ask at family dinners, not even trying to hide his disdain. He was an investment banking director, the kind of man who measured success in square footage and stock options. Every Sunday at their mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut was the same. Eleanor fawning over her daughter, while Henry interrogated me about my finances. My wife Emily would squeeze my hand under the table, a silent apology for her parents. I had been shooting a story in Alaska all week, crossing glacial streams to capture images for National Geographic. I was exhausted, but Emily insisted we couldn't miss her mother's birthday dinner. "Just a few hours," she promised. I should have listened to the knot in my stomach when Eleanor cornered me in the kitchen. The way her eyes darted restlessly before handing me that drink, the slight tremor in her fingers when she said, "I made this especially for you." Something wasn't right. I just didn't know how wrong it was about to get. Emily and I met 6 years ago at an exhibition where my work was being displayed. She was finishing her master's in environmental science, and I was starting to make a name for myself. We connected instantly. She understood my need to capture the world through a lens, and I admired her passion for protecting it. Her parents were another story. From our first meeting, Henry made it clear he expected someone different for his daughter. Someone with a corner office, a 401k, a company car. Someone exactly like him. Eleanor was more subtle. She would praise my photos while asking when I planned to settle down into something stable. She'd invite me to family gatherings and then introduce me as the photographer instead of her son-in-law. For years, I tried to win them over. I brought expensive wines to dinner, showed them published work, mentioned high-profile clients. Nothing changed their perception that I was just a passing phase in their daughter's life, something she would eventually outgrow. Last Christmas, I overheard Eleanor on the phone. Emily could have married Mark, you know. A respected doctor, traditional family. But she chose the creative one. The pause before creative made the word sound like a disease. Henry was more direct. When Emily and I announced we were trying for a baby, he pulled me aside. "Children are expensive, son. Maybe think about a real job before you bring a child into the world." I never told Emily these things. She loved her parents, flaws and all, and I didn't want to force her to choose sides. So I smiled, shook Henry's hand firmly at every visit, praised Eleanor's cooking, and kept my thoughts to myself. But there were signs I should have taken more seriously. The way Eleanor would call Emily to help in the kitchen whenever I spoke about a successful project. How she accidentally left me out of family photos. The time Henry suggested therapy for Emily's impulsive decisions while looking directly at me. I ignored it all, thinking time would eventually bring acceptance. I was wrong. On the Friday of Eleanor's birthday, I returned from Alaska, face wind-burned and a memory card full of images that would pay our mortgage for 3 months. I was drained, but I showered, put on a dress shirt and drove to their colonial-style home in the upscale neighborhood. The dinner started normally. Henry boasted about a recent deal. Eleanor fretted over the table settings. Emily's brother, David, and his wife, Sarah, made polite conversation. I nursed a beer and counted the minutes until we could leave. After the main course, Eleanor announced she had prepared her famous sangria for dessert. She disappeared into the kitchen, and I offered to help carry the glasses. That's when I saw it. She had 2 glasses set apart from the others. As I walked in, she quickly added something from a small vial to one of them. It wasn't a garnish or flavoring. It was colorless, odorless, and she pocketed the vial the moment she heard my footsteps. "Oh, Ryan, I've got this," she said, overly cheerful. "This one is for you." Special recipe for my favorite son-in-law. My throat tightened. The glass had an almost imperceptible film floating on top, catching the light. "Let me help you carry these," I said, taking both glasses she had prepared. In the dining room, Henry was checking his phone, barely looking up as I approached. "Sangria, sir." I placed the tainted glass in front of him, instead of taking it myself. I watched him drink, making an excuse about preferring water with my dessert. 45 minutes later, Henry was pale, sweating, and running for the bathroom. The violent sounds of his sickness echoed through the house. Eleanor's face drained of color as she realized what had happened. Her eyes met mine across the table, and in that moment I knew two things with absolute certainty. My mother-in-law had tried to poison me, and she knew that I knew. I didn't react, didn't confront her, just ate my chocolate cake as Emily rushed to check on her father. In the ensuing confusion, Henry insisting it must be food poisoning, Eleanor stammering about bad shellfish, I quietly pocketed the untouched glass meant for me. Something had shifted inside me. The anger I felt wasn't hot or explosive. It was cold, deliberate. I wasn't just going to let this go, but I wasn't going to fight them on their terms. I was going to make them face exactly who they were. On Monday after the dinner, I took the glass to Jim, a former client who ran a toxicology lab. "Personal or professional?" he asked when I explained what I needed. "Family matter," I replied. 3 days later, he called. "Ryan, there were benzodiazepines in this drink. Nothing lethal, but enough to knock someone out for hours, maybe cause some memory loss. Where'd you get this?" I thanked him and asked for a written report. I didn't answer his question. That night, I told Emily I wanted to skip Sunday dinner for a while. I said I needed to focus on an upcoming exhibition. She was disappointed but understood. I didn't tell her about the test results. Not yet. I needed more information first. Over the next 2 weeks, I did some digging. Eleanor had prescriptions for Xanax from 3 different doctors. She had been doubling and tripling her doses for years. There were also whispers about her in town, erratic behavior at a neighbor's party, accusations of jewelry theft at her country club, stories her family had worked hard to cover up. I compiled everything and waited for my moment. It came when Emily mentioned her mom needed photos for a social media profile. "She specifically asked for you to take them," Emily said, surprised by the request. I agreed. The following Saturday, I arrived at their house alone, my camera bag in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. Eleanor was waiting, elegantly dressed, makeup perfect. Henry was in his study, she explained. "Before we start," I said calmly, "I thought you might want to see this." I handed her the envelope containing the toxicology report, along with printouts of her multiple prescriptions. Her hands trembled as she read. "This is absurd," she whispered. "I would never—" "We both know what happened," I interrupted. "What I don't know is why." Her face hardened. "You are not good enough for my daughter. You never will be. A man should provide security, not photographs. And drugging your daughter's husband provides security." I kept my voice level. "It wasn't going to hurt you," she snapped. "Just make you sick. Make you miss that ridiculous gallery opening you've been talking about for months. Show Emily you're not reliable." I let that sink in. "Here's what happens next," I said finally. "You are going to tell Henry what you did. Then you are both going to start treating me with respect. Not because you've changed your minds about me, but because the alternative is Emily finding out exactly who her parents are." Eleanor laughed, but it sounded hollow. "She would never believe you over us." I picked up my camera bag. "Maybe not. But she'll believe the lab report, the prescription records, and the neighbors you've alienated. Are you willing to bet your relationship with your daughter on that?" I left without taking a single picture. That night, Eleanor called Emily in tears, claiming I had behaved inappropriately during our session, said I was hostile and threatening. When Emily confronted me, I couldn't hide the truth any longer. I showed her everything. The lab report, the prescriptions, even text messages from her mother that had grown increasingly hostile over the years. "My mother wouldn't do this," she kept saying, but her voice lacked conviction. The next day, she confronted her parents. I wasn't there, but when she came home, her eyes were red from crying. "My dad says it's all a misunderstanding," she said quietly, "that you're trying to drive a wedge between us because you're insecure about your career." I just nodded. I had expected this. "What do you think?" I asked. She didn't answer, just crawled into bed and turned away. From me, I had fought back, but I had somehow fallen deeper into their trap. I was the villain in their story now, and they had succeeded in planting doubt in the one person whose opinion mattered most to me. For 2 weeks, Emily barely spoke to me. She went to her parents' house alone, coming back with red eyes and fresh doubts. I threw myself into work, spending long hours in my studio hoping the storm would pass. Then a package arrived for me. No return address, just my name scrawled on top in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a flash drive and a note. "You should see this. Sarah, David's wife." The drive contained video files, home security footage from Henry and Eleanor's house. The timestamps showed the night of the dinner. There was Eleanor in the kitchen, clearly adding something to a drink. There was me walking in, taking the glasses. There was Henry drinking from the spiked glass. But there was more. Footage from after we left. Eleanor screaming at Henry, blaming him for drinking the wrong glass. Henry yelling back, "This isn't the first time you've done something like this." I watched the footage 3 times, trying to process what I was seeing. Not just confirmation of Eleanor's actions, but evidence of a pattern. Evidence that Henry knew. The next file was from 2 days after the dinner. Eleanor and Henry were arguing in the living room about me. "He knows what you did," Henry said. "So what?" Eleanor replied. "It's his word against mine. Emily will never choose him over her family. And if she does, then she's not the daughter I raised," Eleanor said coldly. "Don't worry, I've already started talking to her about their marriage problems, planting seeds. By the time I'm done, she'll be asking for a divorce, thinking it was her idea." I closed my laptop, hands shaking. This wasn't just about me. This was a systematic effort to control Emily's life, to isolate her from anyone who didn't fit their vision. And they had been doing it for years. I called Sarah immediately. "Why did you send me this?" "Because they did the same thing to me when I married David," she said quietly. "They tried to break us up for 2 years, telling him I wasn't good enough. It almost worked. Why didn't you tell us?" "David doesn't know," she admitted. He worships his father, believes anything he says. I tried to tell him, but he thinks I'm paranoid. I just couldn't watch them do this to someone else." The next day I got a text from Henry. "We should talk man to man. No wives, I met him at his country club. He was waiting in a private room, drinking scotch." "Ryan," he began, "families are complicated. My wife, she can be difficult, protective, but she means well." "Is drugging someone meaning well?" I asked. He waved his hand, dismissive. "A misunderstanding. Eleanor takes anxiety medication. She must have mixed up the glasses. I have the security footage, Henry." His face changed instantly, hardening into something cold and calculating. "What do you want? Money? Is that what this is about?" "I always knew you married Emily for financial reasons. I want you both to leave us alone," I said simply. "Stop trying to convince Emily I'm not good enough. Stop interfering in our marriage." Henry leaned forward. "You think this is the first time we've dealt with someone like you? People who want to leech off our family?" He laughed. "Emily will come home where she belongs. She always does. Ask her about Mark. Ask her about the fiancé before you." I felt a chill. "What are you talking about?" "Emily was engaged before she met you. Good kid, a doctor. We didn't like his background. Took 6 months to convince her he wasn't right for her. She broke it off, came home crying to Daddy." He smiled. "History repeats itself, son. On the way home, I called Bethany, Emily's college roommate. I asked about Mark. 'Oh God,' she said, 'that was awful. He was perfect for her, but her parents, they convinced her he was cheating, planted evidence. He tried to tell her the truth, but by then she didn't trust him anymore.' The pattern was clear now. This wasn't just about me. It was about control. Complete control over their daughter's life. And they had done it before. I didn't confront Emily right away. Instead, I started gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I contacted Mark, who was initially reluctant to talk to me. When I explained the situation, he sent me old emails between him and Emily, showing how her parents had systematically undermined their relationship. I contacted other ex-boyfriends, old friends of Emily's who had mysteriously drifted away. A pattern emerged. Anyone who encouraged Emily's independence was gradually cut out of her life. Sarah provided more security footage, showing Eleanor and Henry discussing their plans for us. "When they divorce, we'll convince her to move back home," Henry said in one clip. She can run the foundation, meet suitable men. I compiled everything onto a single drive. Then I invited David and Sarah to dinner. Without telling Emily I was about to shatter her image of her family. Over dessert, I hooked my laptop up to our TV. There's something you both need to see, I said. For the next hour, we watched the footage together. Emily sat motionless, her face pale. David kept shaking his head, muttering, "That's not my parents," under his breath. When it was over, Emily turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I needed you to see it for yourself," I said. "All of it. Not just what they did to me, but what they've been doing to you your whole life." David stood up, furious. "This is a lie. You edited these videos." "My parents wouldn't do this." Sarah touched his arm. "They did it to us too, David. Why do you think they suddenly started liking me after we had Leo? Because a grandchild meant they had leverage." The color drained from David's face. "You never told me." "I tried," she whispered. "You didn't want to hear it." Later that night, Emily crawled into bed beside me. "I need time to process this," she said softly, "but I believe you. And I'm so sorry I ever doubted you." The next morning, Eleanor called. Emily put it on speakerphone. "Darling, I was thinking you should come stay with us for a while," Eleanor said brightly. "Your father and I are worried about you." "Marriage is hard, and sometimes a separation can bring clarity." "Mom," Emily interrupted. "I saw the videos." Silence. "Then what videos?" "The security footage of you putting drugs in Ryan's drink. Of you and Dad planning to end my marriage." Another pause. "Emily, whatever he showed you was manipulated. You know Ryan has always been jealous of our family." "Enough," Emily's voice was firm. "We're coming over tonight, all of us. David, Sarah, Ryan, and me. We're going to talk about this as a family. No more lies." After she hung up, Emily turned to me. "They're going to deny everything. They're going to try to turn this back on you." I nodded. "I know. So what's our plan?" For the first time in weeks, I smiled. "I think it's time for your parents to meet the real me. The one who doesn't just take pictures, but knows how to tell a story." That night, we arrived at Henry and Eleanor's house with my camera gear. David and Sarah were already there, sitting stiffly in the living room. Henry looked confident. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I interrupted, setting up my tripod. "I'm documenting this conversation for the family archives," Eleanor objected immediately. "This is a private family matter." "Exactly," I agreed. "Family matter. And I am family, even if you've tried very hard to change that." For the next 2 hours, we laid it all out. The drink, the manipulation, Mark, the other ex-boyfriends, the pattern that had shaped Emily and David's entire lives. Henry and Eleanor denied everything, of course. They called me unstable, manipulative. But with every denial, I played another clip, showed another email. Their faces grew paler, their denials weaker. Finally, Emily stood up. "I love you both. You're my parents, but what you've done is unforgivable. You don't get to control my life anymore." David nodded. "We're adults. We choose our own partners, our own path." Eleanor began to cry, not out of remorse, but from the realization that she was losing control. Henry just looked stunned, as if he couldn't comprehend his children defying him. As we prepared to leave, I handed Henry a flash drive. "This contains everything. The footage, the emails, the testimonies. It's yours." "What does this mean?" he asked, suspicious. "It means I'm not going to ruin your reputation by sharing this with anyone else." "That would hurt Emily, and I would never do that," I paused. "But if you ever try to interfere in our marriage again, if you ever try to manipulate Emily or speak ill of me, copies will go to every member of your country club, your business partners, and your precious social circle." For the first time since I'd met him, Henry looked at me with something resembling respect. "I underestimated you." "Yes," I said simply. "You did." 6 months passed. Emily and David started therapy to deal with the damage their parents had caused. Eleanor and Henry kept their distance, sending occasional texts but respecting the boundaries we had set. Then around the holidays, they invited us to dinner. "A new beginning," the invitation read. Emily wanted to go. "They're still my parents," she said, "and they're trying." I agreed, but I wasn't naive enough to believe they had changed. When we arrived, everything seemed normal. Eleanor had prepared a feast. Henry was charming, asking about my latest projects with what seemed like genuine interest. After dinner, Henry invited me into his office. "I have a proposal for you," he said, pouring me a scotch. "I've been thinking about your career. Photography is, well, it's been good to you, but have you considered diversifying? I could bring you into my firm. Junior partner track. The salary would be substantial." I took the glass but didn't drink. "Why would you do that?" "Family," he said smoothly. "And I respect how you handled that unpleasantness. You protected my daughter while standing your ground. That's what a real man does." I set the glass down, untouched. "I appreciate the offer, but no." His smile tightened. "Ryan, be reasonable. This is an olive branch, a way for us to move forward." "No," I repeated. "It's another attempt at control. You can't buy me, Henry, and you can't stand the fact that Emily loves me exactly as I am." "Don't be a fool," he hissed, the facade dropping. "Everyone has a price." I stood. "That's where you're wrong, and that's why you'll never understand your daughter." I went back to the dining room, where Eleanor was showing Emily photo albums. "Look at these," she was saying. "You were so happy when you lived at home." Emily saw me from across the room. She could tell from my expression that something had happened. I gave a slight nod and she stood up. "Mom, Dad," she announced clearly, "I have something to tell you." Everyone turned to look at her. "We're expecting a baby. Ryan and I'm 3 months along." The shock on their faces was genuine. Eleanor recovered first, rushing to hug her daughter with tears in her eyes. Henry approached more slowly, looking between Emily and me. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. "Thank you," I replied, then lowering my voice so only he could hear. "This child will never be a pawn in your games. I promise you." His face hardened, but he nodded once. He understood the message. As we drove home that night, Emily squeezed my hand. "They're never going to change, are they?" "No," I said honestly. "But they'll have to accept that we have." 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Henry's lawyer. Inside was a deed to a house, our house which we had been renting, and legal documents establishing a trust fund for our unborn child. There was no note, no conditions, no strings attached. Just the transfer of assets, clean and irrevocable. It wasn't an apology. Henry wasn't capable of that. But it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the only one he could give, that we had won. Our daughter was born in the summer. We named her Olivia after my grandmother. When Eleanor and Henry came to the hospital, they brought gifts but kept a respectful distance. They admired the baby, took pictures and left without trying to give us parenting advice or financial lectures. The months passed, and our relationship with them settled into something resembling normalcy. They never apologized for what they did, but they stopped trying to control Emily's life or undermine my career. One evening, as I was editing photos in my studio, Emily came in carrying Olivia. "My mom called," she said. "She wants us to come for Christmas." I looked up from my computer. "What do you want to do?" "I think we should go," she replied. "But on our terms. We stay in a hotel, not at their house. We leave when we want." "No alone time with Olivia?" I nodded. "Sounds reasonable." She sat beside me, bouncing the baby gently. "You know, I used to think success meant making my parents happy, getting their approval, meeting their expectations." She looked at our daughter, then back at me. "Now I know it's about making choices I can be proud of, standing up for the people I love." 2 weeks before Christmas, a large envelope arrived from Henry. Inside was a glossy catalogue for his company's annual report. My photographs were featured throughout. Landscapes, portraits, architectural shots. The work I had done on my own terms without his interference. There was a brief note. "I hired the best photographer I know. Thought you'd like a copy." It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It was something else, respect maybe. The acknowledgement that I was successful on my own terms, not his. I didn't call to thank him. We both understood this wasn't about gratitude. It was about acknowledging the new boundaries, the new reality. That spring, I opened my own gallery in downtown Manhattan. At the opening, Emily was by my side, Olivia on her hip. My parents came in from Chicago. Friends and clients filled the space, admiring the images I had captured over the years. Henry and Eleanor came too near the end of the night. They didn't stay long. Eleanor held Olivia briefly under Emily's watchful eye. Henry shook my hand, nodded at the photographs with genuine approval, and left without making any suggestions on how I should run my business. As we were closing up that night, Emily asked, "Do you think they've changed?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally. But they've accepted that they can't change us. And sometimes that's enough. Later, as we sat on our porch watching the stars come out over the city, Olivia asleep in her crib upstairs, I realized something I'd never fully articulated before. I hadn't won by playing Henry and Eleanor's game. I had won by refusing to play it at all. I stood my ground, protected what mattered, and built my life on my own definition of success, not with schemes or manipulation, but with honesty and quiet perseverance. In the end, that was the most satisfying revenge of all, living well on my own terms, with the family I loved by my side. The years passed and something unexpected happened. Not quite a reconciliation, but a kind of peace. Henry retired from his position at the investment bank and, to everyone's surprise, took up an interest in photography. Not the kind I did. He gravitated toward macro photography, capturing images of insects and small plants. One day he showed up at my studio, carrying a new expensive camera. "I thought you could give me a few pointers," he said, without the slightest trace of the irony or arrogance I had come to associate with him. I spent the afternoon teaching him about composition, light, and patience, a lot of patience required to capture the perfect moment. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw something genuine in him, not the banker, not the controlling patriarch, but just a man trying to understand a new path. With Eleanor, the transition was more subtle. She never stopped being who she was, fussy, a bit theatrical, always tending to her perfect appearance. But after the birth of her second grandchild, a boy David and Sarah had, something seemed to soften inside her. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was the recognition that her manipulations had nearly cost her relationships with her children. Olivia was 4 when Eleanor gave her her first set of watercolors. It was a simple, unostentatious gift, and it was accompanied by a tired smile at me. "She has your creative eyes," Eleanor said, without the usual tone of disapproval. On a Sunday afternoon, almost 5 years after that fateful night with the sangria, we were all gathered in the garden of our home, not the house Henry had bought for us, which we sold to open the gallery, but one we chose together, with a spacious yard and a separate studio for me. Olivia was running across the grass with her cousin Leo, both of them laughing. As they tried to catch soap bubbles Emily was blowing into the air. David and Sarah were chatting with me about their upcoming trip to Costa Rica, for which I had recommended some incredible places to photograph. I noticed Henry sitting alone in a corner of the garden, watching the children with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. I sat down next to him, offering him a beer. "She looks like Emily at that age," he said, gazing at Olivia. "Everyone says that," I replied. "We did a lot of things wrong," he said after a long pause. It wasn't quite an apology, but for Henry it was the closest he would ever get. "Yes," I agreed, without rancor. "You did. You're building something good here," he said, looking at the house at the family assembled. "Different from what I would have chosen, but good." It was a small moment, a brief opening in a relationship that would likely always be complicated. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't forgetting. It was just acknowledgement of mistakes, of change, of growth. That night, after everyone had left and Olivia was in bed, Emily and I sat on our porch as we had so many times before. "What do you think made them change?" she asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. I thought for a moment. I don't think they did change. Not really. I think they just realized the world doesn't work the way they thought. That they can't control everything, not their children, not life. "We almost lost each other," she said softly. "If you hadn't found out what my mom did that night," I held her tighter. "But I did, and you were strong enough to see the truth, even when it hurt. You know what Mark told me once?" she asked. Mark, her ex-fiancé, had re-entered our lives recently as a friend, now happily married to a doctor who worked at the same hospital. He said that some people only learn the value of something when they're about to lose it. I think my parents finally learned that. The next morning, I received an email from an international art magazine. They wanted to do a feature on my work, focusing on my photographs from Alaska and the way I captured the interplay between nature and humanity. It was an opportunity I had dreamed of for years. I showed the email to Emily, who jumped with joy and hugged me. Then, without thinking too much about it, I forwarded it to Henry and Eleanor with a simple message. "Thought you'd like to know." Minutes later, my phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Ryan," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This is wonderful, congratulations." There was no irony in her voice, no backhanded comment about the instability of photography as a career, just a genuine acknowledgement of achievement. "Thank you," I replied, surprised at my own gratitude for the gesture. We're proud of you," she added, the words sounding foreign in her mouth as if she were trying out a new language. After I hung up, I stared at the phone, trying to process what had happened. In all the years I had known Eleanor, she had never expressed pride in anything I did. It was a small shift, but a significant one. Emily walked into the kitchen, Olivia at her heels. "Who was that?" "Your mom," I replied. "She was congratulating me on the magazine feature." Emily raised her eyebrows. "Really? No comments about how photography isn't a stable job?" I shook my head. "None of that. She said they were proud." "Well," Emily said with a small smile, "maybe miracles do happen." The magazine feature was published 2 months later, with 8 pages dedicated to my work. The journalist had followed me for a week in the Alaskan wilderness, observing how I interacted with indigenous communities, capturing the delicate relationship between preservation and development. The day the magazine hit the newsstands, I received another unexpected phone call. This time it was Henry. "I bought every copy at the newsstand near the office," he said, sounding almost shy. "I'm showing everyone at the bank. You are?" "Yes," he said. "It's impressive what you've done, Ryan. I didn't understand it before." "Your art, what you were trying to say with it." There was an awkward pause. "Do you think we could meet for coffee?" he asked finally. "Just us." I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. We met at a cafe near my gallery. Henry was dressed casually, something I rarely saw him do. He brought a copy of the magazine, the pages already creased from handling. "This photograph," he said, pointing to an image of an elderly fisherman on a remote Alaskan river, his weathered face reflecting decades of struggle and wisdom. "How did you get him to look at the camera like that?" "I didn't ask him to," I explained. "I spent 3 days with him before I ever took a picture. I listened to his stories, met his family. By the time I finally raised the camera, he knew me. He trusted me." Henry nodded slowly. "Patience, relationship building. It's not so different from what we do at the bank, just with different results." It was a small concession, but a telling one. For years, Henry had seen my career as an indulgence, a hobby. Now, for the first time, he was trying to find common ground, to understand my world on his own terms. "Eleanor and I," he started, then stopped, taking a sip of coffee. "We haven't been the best in-laws." I resisted the urge to let out a sarcastic laugh. "No, you haven't. When Emily first brought you home, all we saw was risk." "A photographer? How could you give her the life she deserved? The stability she needed?" "It was never about money for Emily," I said. "She wanted passion, purpose." "I know that now," he admitted. "But at the time, we came from a different generation, a different mindset." "That doesn't justify what Eleanor did," I replied firmly. He looked down. "No, it doesn't. Eleanor has issues, she always has. Control, anxiety, a fear of losing the people she loves." "So you knew about what she put in my drink?" He didn't answer directly. "Our marriage isn't perfect, Ryan. It never has been. But after nearly 40 years together, you learn to accept each other's flaws, even when those flaws hurt other people." He sighed. "Especially then, because facing it would mean facing so much more." It was the most honest admission Henry had ever made, not quite a confession, but an acknowledgement of his complicity through silence, through denial. "Why now?" I asked. "Why this conversation now after all these years?" He took a photo from his wallet. It was an old one, yellowed at the edges. It showed a young woman, maybe 17 or 18, standing next to an easel, paintbrush in hand. "My sister," he explained. "Clara, she was a painter, talented, like you, saw the world in a way I never could." I had never heard of a sister. What happened to her? "Our father didn't approve. Art wasn't a career," he said. "It was a pastime, a distraction. He forced her to study business, to go into the family firm." "And did she?" Henry shook his head. "She ran away. Went to Paris with a photographer she met at an exhibition. We never spoke to her again." "How long ago was that?" 40 years, he said quietly. "She'd be about your age now." It all started to make sense. The irrational fear Henry and Eleanor had of me, the need to control Emily's life, the dread that she would choose a path they didn't understand. "Did you look for her?" "Many times," he admitted. "Never found her. Maybe she changed her name, maybe." He didn't complete the sentence, but the fear was clear in his eyes. "Maybe she wasn't alive anymore." "When I saw your photos in the magazine," he continued, "something clicked. It was like seeing the world through her eyes again. The beauty I had forgotten to look for. It was a stunning revelation. For years I had only seen Henry as the villain in my story, the critical father-in-law, the controlling patriarch. I had never considered that he might be wrestling with his own ghosts, his own regrets. "I'm trying to change, Ryan," he said. "I'm not good at it. I've spent my whole life being one person, thinking one way. But I don't want to lose Emily like I lost Clara. I don't want Olivia to grow up not knowing her grandparents." "That's up to you," I replied. "Respect, boundaries, honesty." "I know," he agreed. "Eleanor is trying too, in her own way." When we parted ways, Henry surprised me with an awkward hug. It was the first physical demonstration of affection he had ever offered me. "Thank you for loving my daughter," he said, "for giving her the strength to be who she is." "She always had that strength," I replied. "She just needed the space to find it." That night I told Emily about my meeting with her father, about the sister she never knew she had. "Aunt Clara," she said, testing the name. "They never mentioned her." "Not once." "I think it was too painful," I suggested. "Or too shameful," Emily replied, "to admit that someone ran away from the perfect family." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing this new piece of her family history. "Do you think we should look for her?" "Clara? I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe she doesn't want to be found. Or maybe she's been waiting 40 years to be looked for," Emily replied. The following week, Emily surprised me with a folder full of old papers she had unearthed from her father's study. "I found these while they were traveling," she explained. "School records, old newspaper clippings." Clara Miller. Born in 1965, disappeared in 1983. "You think we can find her after all this time?" A determined glint entered Emily's eyes, the same look I saw when she threw herself into a new environmental project, the same determination she had inherited from her father, though used for very different purposes. "We're at least going to try," she said. "For Dad. For all of us." We began our search quietly without telling Henry or Eleanor. I used my contacts in the art world, asking about an American painter who would have gone to Paris in the 80s. Emily searched immigration records, social media, any clue we could find. For 2 months, we hit dead ends. Then, just as we were about to give up, I got an email from a French gallerist I had contacted. "I don't know a Clara Miller," he wrote, "but there is an American painter named Claire Lebrun who moved to Paris decades ago. Her early work looks very similar to the images you sent." Attached to the email was a link to a small gallery's website on the outskirts of Paris. The paintings were vibrant, emotional, landscapes from home reimagined through memory and time. I showed Emily, who spent hours studying each image. "It's her," she said finally. "I'm sure of it. Look at this one." She pointed to a painting of a colonial house strikingly similar to her parents' old home in Greenwich. "This is where my dad grew up." She painted it from memory. The question now was, should we tell Henry? Emily was torn. On one hand, finding Clara, or Claire as she now called herself, could bring healing to old wounds. On the other, reopening this chapter of the past could dredge up pains long buried. "I think we need to talk to my mum first," Emily decided. "See what she knows." The following Saturday, while Henry was playing golf, Emily invited Eleanor over for coffee at our house. Olivia was at a swim class, so we had the place to ourselves. Eleanor arrived promptly at 10 a.m., dressed impeccably as always, carrying a small bouquet of flowers and a toy for Olivia. After a few minutes of light conversation, Emily got straight to the point. "Mum, I want to ask you about Clara." Eleanor's face went pale, her hands freezing mid-gesture as she was lifting her coffee cup. "Where did you hear that name?" Her voice was tense, controlled. "Dad mentioned her to Ryan, said she was his sister." "An artist?" Eleanor set the cup back on its saucer with deliberate care. "Clara is a subject we don't discuss in this family." "Why?" "Because she chose to leave it." Eleanor's voice was cold, but I detected something behind it, an old hurt, perhaps even fear. "How did you know her?" I asked gently. "Were you and Henry already together when she left?" Eleanor looked at me, weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she sighed. "Henry and I were engaged. Clara was my friend before she was my sister-in-law. We studied art together in college. This caught us by surprise. You studied art? A sad smile flickered across Eleanor's face. For a year. Until I met Henry and learned that the Miller family had different expectations for the women in their circle. It was a side of Eleanor we had never seen, the young woman who, like Clara, might have dreamed of a different life. What happened? Emily pressed gently. Eleanor stared into the distance as if watching a movie of her youth projected on our living room wall. Clara was brilliant, talented in a way I never was. When your grandfather found out she wanted to be a painter, he was furious. Said art was for mistresses, not for the daughter of one of the richest men in New York. And she ran away? Eleanor nodded. With a French photographer, Pierre something. I helped her. You? Emily looked shocked. I gave her money, bought her tickets. I envied her courage. Eleanor twisted the napkin in her hands. Your father never forgave me for it. He thinks I don't know he's been looking for her for years, but I do. I've always known. Why did you never tell us about her? Emily asked, her voice betraying the hurt of a family history kept secret. Because it was easier to pretend she never existed than to admit how much we missed her. How much your father regretted not standing up for her. Eleanor looked directly at me. It's why he was always so hard on you, Ryan. You reminded him of her. The same passion, the same refusal to follow the expected path. The pieces were beginning to fit. Henry and Eleanor's behavior, their irrational fear of losing control, their extreme reaction to my presence in Emily's life. We found her, Emily said softly, showing Eleanor the images we had discovered. She's in Paris. She goes by Claire now. Eleanor took the tablet with trembling hands, staring at the paintings with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Tears began to fall silently down her perfectly made-up face. These landscapes, she whispered, they're from the family estate in Virginia. And this is the view from her bedroom in the old house. She looked up at Emily. She remembers. After all these years, she still remembers. We were thinking of contacting her, I explained. Maybe setting up a reunion. Eleanor shook her head vehemently. Henry would be devastated if he knew you found her without telling him. He needs to be a part of this. It was the first time I'd seen Eleanor genuinely concerned for someone else's feelings besides her own. Maybe there was more to their marriage than the controlling dynamic we had witnessed. How do we tell him? Emily asked. Let me do it, Eleanor replied, surprising us again. I owe him that. I owe all of you. That night, Eleanor invited Henry to dinner at our house. She didn't say why, only that it was important. He arrived looking confused and slightly apprehensive. After she served dinner, Eleanor stood up and retrieved a large envelope from her purse. Henry, she began, her voice softer than we'd ever heard it. There's something you need to see. She slid the envelope across the table. Inside were the printouts of Claire's paintings and the address of the gallery in Paris. What is this? He asked, frowning as he examined the images. It's Clara, Eleanor said simply. So your sister? Henry looked up sharply, his face ashen. How did you... Ryan and Emily found her, Eleanor explained. She goes by the name Claire now. Claire Lebrun. She has a gallery in Paris. Henry looked back at the paintings, his fingers tracing the outlines of the familiar landscapes, the home of his childhood reimagined through his lost sister's eyes. All these years, he murmured. I looked everywhere. I hired detectives, and she was there all along, painting our home. He looked at Eleanor with an expression I couldn't read. Did you know? She held his gaze steadily. No, but I knew one day she would be found. People like Clara, like Ryan, they leave a mark on the world, Henry. It's what makes them special. It was the first time I'd heard Eleanor say something genuinely positive about my life's work. I want to see her, Henry said, the resolve clear in his voice. Let's go to Paris then, Emily suggested. All of us. No family trip. Henry looked at each of us. His daughter, the son-in-law he had tried to drive away, the wife who had hidden her own artistic dreams. Then, to our surprise, his eyes filled with tears. Thank you, he said simply, for finding her, for not giving up on us. 3 weeks later, we were on a plane to Paris, Emily, me, Olivia, Henry, and Eleanor. We had sent an email to Claire, explaining who we were, asking permission to visit. Her reply was cautious but welcoming. After 40 years, I suppose it's time for a reunion. Come to the gallery on Thursday at 7 p.m. I'll be closed to the public. Eleanor was a nervous wreck the entire flight, repeatedly checking her makeup, smoothing her perfectly coiffed hair. What if she hates me? She whispered to me when the others were distracted. For staying, for choosing her brother over art. You can't know what she thinks after this long, I replied. But we're about to find out. The small gallery was on a cobblestone street in the 11th arrondissement. A simple sign out front read, Galerie Lebrun. When we entered, a woman was standing with her back to us, adjusting a light on a painting. We are closed, she said in French without turning. We reopen tomorrow at 10. Clara? Henry's voice was almost unrecognizable, thick with emotion. The woman froze, then turned slowly. She had the same angular face as Henry, the same piercing eyes, though hers were framed by laugh lines rather than the harsher creases that marked her brother's face. Her hair was stark white, cut in a chic bob. No one has called me that in a very long time, she said in English, her accent faintly touched by decades in France. Henry took a step forward, hesitant. I looked for you. I know, she replied. Pierre saw your detectives a few times. We decided that if you truly wanted to find me, it would have to be on my terms, not the Miller family's. She took in Eleanor, who was standing half hidden behind Henry. Eleanor, you haven't changed a bit. Neither have you, Eleanor replied, stepping out from the shadows, still as brilliant as ever. Claire smiled, a smile so similar to Olivia's that I felt a shiver run down my spine. And this must be Emily and Ryan, she said, turning her attention to us. And little Olivia, your pictures don't do you justice. Our pictures? I asked, confused. Claire gestured to a computer on her counter. I found you online after I received your email. Your photography work, Ryan. The gallery in New York. Emily's environmental projects. She led us through the gallery, stopping occasionally to explain a specific painting. There was no hostility in her voice, just a kind of measured distance, the kind that develops after decades of separation. And Pierre? Henry asked, looking around as if expecting the French photographer to appear at any moment. Claire's face softened. Pierre passed 5 years ago, cancer. I'm so sorry, Henry said, and I could tell he meant it. We had 40 wonderful years together, she replied. 2 children, 3 grandchildren. She stopped to look at Olivia, who was admiring a painting of a colorful toucan. The oldest is almost her age now. Eleanor stepped forward, hesitant. Do they know about us, the family in America? They know I have a brother, a niece and nephew I've never met. Claire looked directly at Henry. I never hid where I came from. I just chose not to go back. Henry seemed to be struggling with his emotions. Father has been dead for 20 years, Claire finished for him. I know, I read the obituary. He looked for you too, Henry said quietly. In his final years. Claire nodded, but her face remained impassive. Too late. There was an uncomfortable silence. Olivia, oblivious to the tension, pointed at the toucan painting. Grandpa, look! It's like the one we saw at the zoo. Henry crouched beside his granddaughter, grateful for the distraction. It is, sweetheart. But this one is free, not in a cage. Claire watched the interaction, something in her eyes softening. She looks like you, Henry, when we were children. Everyone says she looks like Emily, he replied. And Emily looks like you, Claire pointed out. The Miller genes are strong. She led us to a studio in the back of the gallery, where a table had been set for dinner. I thought we could talk more privately here, she explained. Over the meal, a delicious spread of French and American dishes, the atmosphere gradually relaxed. Claire asked about our lives in New York, and Emily told stories of growing up as Henry and Eleanor's daughter, some making everyone laugh, others drawing exchange glances between the siblings that spoke of family patterns that transcended generations. So Ryan, Claire said eventually, did Henry finally accept an artist in the family? I looked at Henry, unsure how to answer. It took time, Henry admitted, surprising everyone with his candor. And I almost lost my daughter in the process. The old Miller method, Claire commented dryly. Control through fear of disappointment. It wasn't just that, Eleanor interrupted, her voice trembling slightly. It was fear. Plain and simple. Fear that Emily would follow the same path you did, Clara. Claire, and that we would never see her again. Claire studied Eleanor for a long moment. But you helped me leave, Eleanor. You gave me money for the tickets. Because you were brave enough to do what I couldn't, Eleanor replied. I loved art just as much as you did, but I didn't have your strength. So I stayed. I married Henry. I tried to convince myself it was what I wanted. Henry stared at his wife, shocked. You never told me that. How could I? Eleanor asked. You had already lost your sister to art. How could I tell you I dreamed of it too? It was as if a mask had fallen. The perfectly composed Eleanor we knew was crumbling before our eyes, revealing the vulnerable, complex woman underneath. So when Emily brought Ryan home, Claire began. All my fear resurfaced, Eleanor completed. Fear that she would choose a path that would take her away from us like you. Fear that she would discover how much I had compromised on my own dreams. So you tried to sabotage their relationship, Claire concluded. Eleanor bowed her head. I wasn't thinking clearly. I did things. Unforgivable things. Like what? Claire asked, looking from Eleanor to me. Emily and I exchanged glances. We hadn't planned on airing the whole story during this first reunion, but it seemed we were past the point of hiding truths. She put something in my drink during a dinner, I explained. A sedative, most likely. I noticed and swapped glasses with Henry. Claire's eyebrows shot up, turning to her brother. And how did you react to that, Mano? Brother Henry looked deeply uncomfortable. Not well, I defended Eleanor. We tried to control the situation. By manipulating Emily into doubting Ryan, Claire guessed. Yes, Henry didn't try to deny it. We did the same to her fiancé before Ryan. Mark, Emily supplied. And to me and David too, Sarah added. Claire nodded, as if receiving confirmation of something she already suspected. Some things never change, it seems. Henry looked at his sister with sad eyes. But some do. We're trying. We're here. Claire let out a long, considered sigh. When I got your email, she said, looking at Emily and me, my first instinct was to say no. 40 years is a long time. I've built my life here. My family, my career. I didn't need to reopen old wounds. Why didn't you? I asked. She smiled, gentle but sharp. Because I saw your work, Ryan, and yours, Emily. I saw that you are not like Henry and Eleanor were, like my parents were. I saw that maybe the Miller family had finally evolved. She stood and went to a bookshelf, pulling down a thick photo album. Besides, she continued, I thought it was time for my niece and nephew to meet their cousins. She opened the album, revealing photos of 2 children growing up in Paris, then becoming adults, marrying, having their own children. Antoine is 38 now. He's a literature professor at the Sorbonne. Sophie is 35, a marine biologist. Antoine has 2 children, Sophie has 1. Emily ran her fingers over the photos, marveling. We have cousins in Paris. Olivia has... What would they be? Second cousins. Family, Claire said simply. Their family? Henry couldn't hold back his tears any longer. They streamed freely down his face, years of grief and regret finally finding release. I'm sorry, Clara, he sobbed, reverting to her childhood name. I'm so sorry I didn't support you. For letting Father dictate our lives. For everything. Claire watched her brother for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and touched his arm. I know, she said softly. I know, it wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was a start. An opening to something new after decades of silence. Antoine and Sophie would love to meet you, Claire continued. They're coming for lunch tomorrow, if you're willing. We'd love that, Emily replied, looking to me for confirmation. I nodded, smiling. A family reunion, Eleanor murmured as if she could hardly believe it. Claire studied her for a moment. Do you still paint, Eleanor? Eleanor looked startled by the question. No, not in years. But you wanted to, Claire stated, not as a question. Eleanor looked at Henry, then at Emily, as if measuring the impact of her answer. Yes, she said finally. I always wanted to. It's never too late, Claire said, gesturing to her studio around them. Trust me. When we said our goodbyes that night, arranging to return for lunch the next day, there was a lightness between us that hadn't existed when we arrived. We weren't a healed family, far from it. But we were a family that was finally facing its truths, however uncomfortable they were. On the walk back to the hotel, Olivia asleep in Emily's arms, Henry walked silently beside me. The Paris streets were quiet, bathed in the golden light of the old-fashioned street lamps. Thank you, he said suddenly, for finding her, for giving me a second chance with my sister. It was Emily who insisted, I answered honestly. But it was you who showed us the way, he argued. You stood up to us when we tried to push you away. You protected Emily not just from us, but from becoming like us. He stopped, looking at his daughter and granddaughter a few feet ahead, talking quietly with Eleanor. Do you know why I was always so afraid of artists? He asked. Because your sister ran away with one, he shook his head. Because artists see the truth. They see through the facades that people like me build. Clara always saw who I really was. Not the dutiful son father wanted, but a scared boy trying desperately to measure up. And you saw through Eleanor and me from day one, didn't you? I pondered Henry's question as we continued walking. I saw two people trapped in a way of life they didn't know how to leave, I replied at last. Even when it was causing them pain. Even when it was hurting the ones they loved. He nodded, accepting my assessment without defensiveness, something that would have been unthinkable a few years prior. You know I envied you, he confessed. Your freedom. Your ability to live on your own terms without caring what other people think. It's not that I don't care, I corrected gently. It's that I learned to value the right opinions. Family's my own. A lesson it's taken me 70 years to even begin to learn, he remarked with a sad smile. The lunch the next day was a revelation. Antoine arrived first, a tall, lean man with the same aquiline nose as Henry, but with Claire's gentle eyes. He brought his wife Margot and their children, two girls aged 7 and 9 who were immediately fascinated by Olivia. Sophie arrived soon after, shorter than her brother, with the dark hair of her father Pierre, according to Claire, but with the unmistakable Miller smile. Her husband Philippe brought their 4-year-old son, a shy boy who hid behind his father's legs, until Olivia coaxed him out to play with her miniature animal figures we'd brought as gifts. At first it was awkward. Language barriers, unknown family histories, the weight of 40 years of separation. But gradually, as food was served and wine flowed, the conversations eased. Antoine, we discovered, had a love for American literature. Fitzgerald, Hemingway, he listed in his carefully studied English. Mom always made sure we knew our American roots. Sophie, on the other hand, had visited the US several times for her marine research. The biodiversity off the Florida Keys is incredible, she explained to Emily in fluent English. I was in Belize last year studying corals. My brother lives near there, Emily replied, surprised. David and Sarah moved to Costa Rica a few years ago. David, Sophie repeated the name, testing it. My other uncle. And he has children? One boy, Leo, he's 9 now, Sophie smiled. I'll have to meet him the next time I'm there. Meanwhile, Eleanor had struck up a conversation with Margot, who turned out to be an art curator at a small Parisian museum. To my surprise, the two of them were deep in a discussion about the American modernist movement. O'Keeffe was revolutionary, Eleanor said excitedly. Her way of capturing the experience of the landscape, the rural life. Henry watched his wife with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of admiration and sadness, as if he were seeing a glimpse of the woman she might have been had she followed her passion. Claire caught his gaze and sat beside her brother. It's never too late, Henry, she said softly, for either of us. At the end of the afternoon, as the meal wound down and the children played in the small garden behind the gallery, Antoine proposed a toast. To family, he said, raising his glass. Lost and found. To family, we all agreed. Afterward, as I was helping Claire with the dishes against her protests, I found a moment to ask the question that had been on my mind. Did you forgive them? I asked. Henry, your parents, for what they did. Claire thought for a moment, her hands still in the soapy water. Forgiveness is complicated, she replied finally. It's not a destination, it's a journey. Some days I feel I've forgiven them completely. Other days the anger is still there. She dried her hands and turned to me, but I chose not to be defined by that anger. I chose to build a life filled with love and beauty. And for me, that was the greatest victory. Back in New York, something had shifted in our family dynamic. Small things at first. Eleanor began painting again, setting up a small studio in their guest room. Henry cut back his hours at the bank, dedicating more time to his newfound passion for nature photography. More significantly, they stopped interfering in their children's lives. When David and Sarah announced they were thinking of moving permanently for a marine conservation project in Costa Rica, Henry offered support instead of trying to talk them out of it. Life is too short to live someone else's dreams, he said. a sentiment that would have been unthinkable a few years prior. On our wedding anniversary, 6 months after our trip to Paris, Eleanor and Henry surprised us with an unexpected gift: 2 plane tickets to France. Claire is having a major retrospective exhibition, Eleanor explained. She wants you to photograph it, Ryan, for a book they're publishing on her work. And Olivia? I asked, knowing we had school and commitments. We'll watch her, Henry replied. If you trust us. Emily and I exchanged a look. A few years ago, the idea of leaving Olivia in her grandparents' care for 2 weeks would have been unthinkable. Now it felt possible. Thank you, Emily said, hugging her parents. We trust you. Antoine and Sophie came to the US that Christmas with their children. It was the first time Claire had returned to her homeland in over 40 years. She cried as the plane landed, clutching her children's hands. Welcome home, Henry said, simply as we met her at the airport. I'm nervous, Claire confessed to me later, as we drove to the old family home in Greenwich, now converted into a cultural center. What if I don't recognize anything? What if everything I've painted from memory all these years is wrong? Then you've created something new, I replied. Something that's true in a different way. She smiled, squeezing my arm. You're wise, nephew. The house was different, of course, restored, repainted, adapted for its new purpose. But as Claire stood in the entryway, staring up at the grand central staircase, she gasped. It's exactly as I remembered, she whispered. Just like in my dreams. As we walked the halls, Claire told stories, some that Henry confirmed with a laugh, others he listened to in surprise, gaps in his own memory being filled by his sister's perspective. Eleanor, to everyone's surprise, had arranged a small exhibition at the cultural center. Her own paintings, created in the months since our trip to Paris. They weren't technical masterpieces, but they were heartfelt, emotional, full of a color and light that reflected a new freedom in her expression. Eleanor, Claire said as she admired the canvases, they're wonderful. They're amateurish, Eleanor replied, blushing. I'm just starting again. But you started, Claire replied. That's the most important part. On Christmas Eve, our house was full. David and Sarah with Leo, Henry and Eleanor, Claire and her children, grandchildren, spouses. It was loud, chaotic at times, with conversations in English and French mixing together. I watched Henry in a corner, holding his newest grandchild, Sophie's baby. His face was soft, contemplative. What are you thinking about? I asked, sitting beside him. About how different things could have been, he replied. If I had supported Claire, like you supported Emily, if I had had the courage to stand up to my father. We can't change the past, I remarked. No, he agreed, but we can learn from it. He smiled down at the baby in his arms. And we can do better with the new generations. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Emily and I sat on our porch as we had so many times before. Olivia was fast asleep, exhausted from a day of playing with her French cousins. Who would have thought? Emily murmured, leaning her head on my shoulder. That one poisoned glass of sangria would lead us here. I laughed softly. It wasn't the poison. It was what we did after. She nodded, thoughtful. The truth. Facing it, no matter how painful. And refusing to let others define who we are, I added, or who we should be. Emily laced her fingers through mine. You know what I think sometimes? That if my parents had been different, more accepting, less controlling, we never would have discovered how strong we are together. So maybe we should thank them, I suggested with a wry smile. Maybe, she agreed, returning it. But let's not push it. Years later, when Olivia was 10, she found an old photo album in the attic. Pictures from Eleanor's birthday dinner, from that fateful night when everything began to change. Dad, she asked, bringing the album to me, why is Grandma looking at you so strangely in this picture? I looked at the image. Eleanor watching me intently as I held a glass, Henry distracted in the background. The moment captured just minutes before the swap that would alter the course of our lives forever. It's a long story, sweetheart, I replied, putting an arm around her shoulders. Their story about family and how sometimes we have to lose something to truly find it. Like Great Aunt Claire? She asked. Exactly like Great Aunt Claire, I agreed. And like your grandparents, who learned that loving someone means letting them be who they really are, not who you want them to be. Olivia nodded, with the simple but profound wisdom of youth. Like you and Mom do with me. We try, I replied, kissing the top of her head. Every day we try. That night, as I was putting the album away, I found a note tucked between its pages, handwriting I recognized as Eleanor's, though shakier than usual. "Ryan," it read, "I never properly thanked you for what you did for our family, for standing your ground when we tried to push you away, for bringing Claire back to us, for teaching Henry and me that control isn't love, that artists aren't people to be feared but to be heard. Thank you for seeing the truth when we couldn't. With gratitude, Eleanor." I put the note away, moved by this unexpected acknowledgement. It wasn't a perfect story. Our relationship still had their rough patches, their tensions. Eleanor could still be controlling. Henry could still be critical. But we had found a path through the maze of family resentment to something healthier, truer. And at the center of it all was that one moment of decision, when I took that tainted glass and made a choice. Not to return manipulation with manipulation, but to eventually shine a light on the truth, however uncomfortable it was. Because in the end, that's the only thing that truly heals. Not time, not forgetting, but the willingness to see and be seen. To acknowledge our flaws and still choose love, over and over, day after day. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of the Miller family touched your heart. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking on your left. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexities of life. Don't miss our upcoming content. We look forward to your comments.